Tracealyzer provides visual trace diagnostics for developers of RTOS and Linux-based embedded systems. This allows for recording and visualizing the software at runtime. For multitasking embedded software, the source code does not give the full picture of the runtime system, which can be seen like a black box or the dark side of the code, if you will. Visual trace diagnostics gives you a detailed timeline of the runtime system and a large set of visual overviews, metrics, and statistics. This makes it far easier to debug system-level issues, problems that are detected when running the full system, which otherwise can be quite difficult and time-consuming to resolve. Moreover, you can also find software design flaws as early as possible, and thereby improve reliability, performance, and reduce the risk of future problems. Finally, it makes it easy to measure timing and performance metrics for verification of real-time requirements and for tracking and optimizing software performance throughout the development. The data collection relies on a software library with very few hardware dependencies, so it works on essentially any processor and doesn't require any extra hardware. It allows for continuous live streaming of trace data from the target system to host, so you can monitor the system over long periods of time. You can even see live animated views of the data. Let me show you what live streaming looks like. Once the initial configuration is done, we just click Start Recording and Tracealyzer begins to receive, process and visualize the trace data in real time. This application is a PID motor controller, and we can see the control signals in the bottom right view: target position, actual position and motor torque. These are variables in the code that we are logging with Tracealyzer. On the left, you see the trace view showing the execution of RTOS tasks and interrupts. Once we have recorded the software behavior of interest, we stop the recording and thereby enable all views and features in Tracealyzer for more detailed analysis. As of October 2020, Tracealyzer supports embedded Linux and the following list of real-time operating systems. Streaming is supported for most of these platforms. In other cases, the recorded data is stored in a target-side RAM buffer, what we call snapshot mode. Software tracing is nothing new, but raw trace data is difficult to use in practice. Viewing this in a text editor isn't very helpful. You get large amounts of low-level events, where most are irrelevant repetitions of the same patterns. You can't see the forest for all the trees. To really benefit from software trace data in everyday development, the solution needs two more components. The data needs to be processed into a meaningful model describing how each event affects the system state. This requires the solution to understand all RTOS services that are traced, not just by the name, but what they actually do. The data needs to be visualized to allow quick intuitive comprehension and actionable insights, even for large datasets. The human brain is visual and excellent at pattern recognition, especially at spotting anomalies in repeating patterns. We can leverage that by showing visual overviews from different perspectives, such as graphs over CPU load or task response times. Finally, by connecting the views, we allow for a top-down workflow that is ideal for system-level analysis. Spot anomalies in high-level overviews and drill down to inspect the details. We call this visual trace diagnostics. This is useful for debugging purposes whenever you need a timeline for your software. This is often the case when debugging a full multitasking system, and especially important when the location of the bug isn't obvious from the symptoms, when the issue is difficult to repeat. Perhaps it only occurs once in a while for no apparent reason, or when interactive source code debugging can't be used, perhaps since the system can't be halted for debugging, or that you physically can't connect a debug probe. While many still use printf debugging in such cases, visual trace diagnostics is a superior alternative. The logging is much less intrusive, about 100 times faster than a printf over a serial port, which allows for logging much more information, also from the RTOS kernel. And the data is easier to analyze, even for large datasets, thanks to the powerful visualization. This means less debugging time and more time available for customer value creation. and with better ability to solve complicated bugs, you reduce the risk of project delays or having to work 100 hours per week to make the deadline. Finally, better insight during debugging means less guesswork involved, which is likely to improve software quality as the bugs are fixed properly. Here is a basic example of system-level debugging. We have a software system with a shared resource used by different parts of the software. For simplicity, we're using the serial console UART as example of this shared resource, but it could be anything like global data or other hardware interfaces. When testing this system, it usually works fine, but once in a while, the UART output is corrupted. There are two kinds of data written to the UART. For clarity, this is represented by the letters H and L. Normally, we get about 50 bytes of L data and 20 bytes of H data, as can be seen in the upper part of the screen. At one point, the H data seems to come in the middle of the L data, which corrupts the output. So, what's going on here? To analyze this with Tracealyzer, we record a trace of the test case until we see the problem again. In the trace view on the right, you see the RTOS task scheduling and RTOS API calls. These are recorded automatically in supported operating systems. We have also added a user event in the UART driver to capture this in the trace. User events are shown as yellow labels. We see that two different tasks are writing to the UART, so they are probably interfering somehow. But the trace is quite long, so how do we find the location of this error? To find this, we make use of one of the overviews, the actor instance graph. This is shown on the left, displaying the response time of the tasks, which can reveal interference by higher priority tasks. This view can also show other timing metrics of interest. The actor instance graph gives a high-level overview of the trace, currently at a zoom level of 10 seconds. We can directly see an anomaly that could be related to the problem. By double-clicking on this data point, we navigate the trace view to this exact millisecond and can see what happened there. This is what we mean by top-down workflow. In the trace view, we can see that the red task is preempting while the yellow task is writing its data. Apparently, there was no synchronization here to avoid access conflicts like this. We can solve that easily by adding a mutex in the UART driver. Another important use of visual trace diagnostics is to find software design flaws as early as possible. You have probably learned the hard way that designing RTOS-based software is quite challenging. There are best practices in RTOS software design, and these are important to follow. By design flaws, we mean deviations from these best practices. They are not necessarily functional errors, but they may reduce performance and responsiveness, increase the risk of future bugs, and make the system testing less effective. The impact on system testing can be especially problematic as it increases the risk of elusive bugs that leak out into production devices. This may occur if design flaws causes the system behavior to become less deterministic, more random, so to say. For instance, by introducing unpredictable variations in software timing. Complex and chaotic system behavior reduces the testability and may cause race conditions and other problems that may elude detection during the testing. Design flaws are important to find early, otherwise you might find yourself in debugging hell when the application grows, which may require a major redesign of the software. This is much more difficult in later stages of the project. The earlier you can find software design flaws, the fewer changes are required to fix them. With Tracealyzer, you can easily identify design flaws like excessive dependencies between tasks, unsuitable task priorities, and variations in software timing, so you can fix them early and avoid later problems. This is a technical depth where the interest rate can be very costly to neglect. Here is an interesting example we found in Wi-Fi driver code from a major MCU vendor. When applying Tracealyzer to their IoT demo project, we noticed two issues immediately. We were stress testing the solution by sending blocks of about 500 bytes repeatedly over the Wi-Fi connection, but the maximum throughput was only like 23 kilobytes per second. This is really slow for a Wi-Fi connection. In the trace view on the left, we can see that it takes about 20 milliseconds to send each block. Moreover, during this time, the Wi-Fi driver task was running constantly using all available processor time, as you can see on the right. To analyze why the blocks took 20 milliseconds to send, we inserted a few user events in the SPI driver, where the data was sent to the Wi-Fi chip. We could then see that DMA transfers was used for every SPI message. This is efficient for large data transfers, but DMA was also used for the numerous small handshaking messages that was required for each data transfer. As a result, every SPI message took at minimum 2 milliseconds, even if just 2 bytes were sent, which added up to about 20 milliseconds per data package. The solution was to add a condition on the message size, so that DMA is only used for larger messages. Regarding the high CPU load, we noted that a Wi-Fi task didn't suspend while waiting for the SPI transfers to complete. An RTOS task should suspend itself when it's not doing anything useful by calling a suitable RTOS API function. Those are traced by Tracealyzer, but we can't see any such events here in the trace. This is a sure sign of busy waiting, where the task is waiting by executing a loop until a condition is met. This is considered bad practice, as the lower priority tasks are then not able to execute during that time. When digging some more in the code, we found a likely explanation within a few minutes, as seen in the lower box. The solution is to ensure that the Wi-Fi task uses the appropriate RTOS functions to wait in suspended state, instead of using busy waiting loops. In this case, there was even an option available for this, but it wasn't enabled by default. Last but not least, visual trace diagnostics can be used to measure software timing and resource usage. This way, you can verify real-time requirements and keep track of the software performance and resource usage throughout the development project. Tracealyzer provides timing metrics on task instance level, where you get a data point for each execution, each job of a task, such as task execution times, task response time, periodicity, etc. You can also define custom intervals based on user events that you add anywhere in your code, and then see the time between these events. You can even plot this data as shown on the right. And for all these properties, you can see the lowest, highest, and average values for each dataset. The highest and lowest values are also linked to the corresponding locations in the trace, so you can see the explanation behind these extreme values. Tracealyzer can also provide metrics on resource usage, such as the average CPU usage of each task, plots over memory usage, and the amount of data sent over an I/O interface. This way, you can ensure compliance with real-time requirements of your application, keep track of product performance, and find ways of improving it for a more responsive and capable product, improving customer satisfaction and sales. This can also avoid project delays by enabling early detection of any performance issues. In short, Tracealyzer is the leading solution for visual trace diagnostics and provides several important benefits. Easier debugging of system-level issues, finding software design flaws, and verification of timing and performance. This saves time and money by less debugging time, reduces the risk of project delays, improves product reliability and performance, and frees up developer time for important customer value creation. It works on essentially any processor and no extra hardware is required. To learn more about Percepio Tracealyzer and Percepio DevAlert, visit our website percepio.com. Thank you.